Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. Today, we're joined by a very special guest who's got an exciting announcement this week as she launches a new book. Irial O'Farrell is the principal of Evolution Consulting. She's a change manager and she's the best-selling author of 3 books. Values, they're not just for the office wall plaque. A book about smart objective setting for managers, and her new book, launched this week, The Manager's Dilemma. Irial's focus is on building better businesses and developing high-performance leaders with a focus on strategy, structure, culture, and capacity. And I'm very excited to talk to her today about her new book and what we can take as leaders away from it. So, Irial, without any further ado, please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
Hi, Mick. I'm delighted to be here with you and joining you on the Leadership Project. So a bit of background about me and how I started my journey and ended up writing books. I think my journey really started actually in Australia, in your own country, in Sydney, where I worked. I was temping, working for a financial services company, and I was very interested how people responded to 2 different managers. So one manager people warmed to, and the other manager not so much. And I would observe what was one manager doing versus the other manager. And I think, well, I didn't realize it at the time that it was going to be the start of my fascination with the human in the workplace and performance and meeting the human's needs and the business's needs. But it definitely prompted my interest. I then moved to Boston and I worked in, again, financial services in operations, and I very quickly moved into management. And again, I was managing a team, training them up, trying to figure out what was blocking their ability to do their day job, and developing them towards promotion into their own career. So I did that, was manager for about a year, and then I was asked to work as part of a team to look at basically an organization design project, which was really interesting because you realize how the infrastructure of an organization feeds into the culture and the behaviors and how the organization performs. In 1999, but who's counting, I moved back to Dublin, Ireland, and went into operations again as a manager, and then moved into, at that stage in Ireland, the funds industry was taking off with gusto, and there was an awful lot of work and not that many people able to do the work. So I moved into training initially, thinking I'll do this for 6 months, then move back into operations. And as it turned out, I found something I loved even more than funds and management. So I ended up setting up a training function, learning and development. Ended up growing the team to about 5 or 6, and it was really interesting because the training is often seen as do we have to do this? But it actually became a strategic enabler of the business. So when the business decided to move into a new area, they knew they had the asset and the ability to develop the people up and their understanding and their ability to deliver the work to be able to succeed in moving into that space. So they were really seeing it as a strategic enabler, which was an amazing place to be, actually, I have to say. And then I was, a lot of training, which is great for skills and knowledge. And then it's kind of, well, people who say, yeah, I'm absolutely all on board for doing that. And they go back to the day job and they don't necessarily change. So it was like, well, what's the blockers for individuals? Which brought me into the executive coaching, which is where I came across the idea of values, which had a huge impact on me personally, which is why I wrote the values book in 2012. And then over the years, I've done a lot of leadership development, organization design, change management. And so I became an accredited master in change last year. when I also wrote the Smart Objectives book. So this, I suppose, this particular book is somewhat of a follow-on. It does bring in the SMART objective setting as a way of developing people. But it's also based on workshop that I developed years ago, because I realized managers are really, really good at solving their own problems, but they don't necessarily know how to develop somebody else's problem solving, because it's quite a complex thing, and it's almost nebulous for a lot of people as to, well, I know how I do it, but how would I develop somebody else's ability to do it? And for me, I saw so many managers in pain because they didn't know how to do this. And I kind of thought, well, I think that has to be my next book, because if I can help managers understand how do you go about doing this, how do you understand the structure of problem solving, and how do you develop people up to be able to solve their own issues and problems. And when I say problem solving, I'm not talking about mad big problems. I'm just talking about that everyday stuff where it's like, it's stopping them doing their job. It needs to be sorted, but probably they could, with a bit of coaching, with a bit of understanding, they could probably sort it out themselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Irial, and that's going to lead us nicely shortly to the manager's dilemma and the themes that come through that book. We'll come back to that in a moment. What have you learnt during that time yourself? So you're going through that process and you're evolving to become author, evolving to become an expert in change management. What about your own leadership and management style? What did you learn about yourself throughout that journey?
It's a great question. And I think I draw on what I've learned about my own journey as I'm coaching and working with other leaders. And one of the things I absolutely have learned over the years is I used to be incredibly black and white. It was A or it was B, and there was very little gray in between. And my husband would now say I'm a bit too gray. So I've made that huge transition to, well, it's no longer absolutely A or absolutely B. It's no longer 100% or zero. That it is about the gray. It is about the sort of, to what degree and how do we flex within the parameters of what we're trying to achieve. But I don't have to say the route is a straight line from A to B anymore. I can say, well, it's from A, we need to get to B, but it could be that we go via C or D or A, B, and C, or, it's all of a sudden there are more options. And when I did my coaching course, that was one of the huge things. Two fundamental learnings for me was, one, I became more flexible in the options, in identifying options, and kind of saying, okay, the obvious one is, A, but in actual fact, there are many ways I can do this. And I could see so many more options, which made my life an awful lot easier. And it was a huge learning. And the other thing was my values. I have very, I suppose, strong values. Coupled with a black and white approach is not a good combination. And the values piece, when I had that aha moment of values, it was like, oh my goodness, this is just a game changer for me. It really, really made a difference to me. And to such an extent that I would inevitably, in working with my clients, my coaching clients, I'd say 95% of the time, I would get them to explore their values, because it is such a driver for us as humans, and we don't even realize it.
This is resonating really strongly with me, Irial, to share with you some of the values and beliefs that we believe in here at the Leadership Project. One of the ones that we've got listed on our chart that we share, it's not just for the office wall plaque, but it's one of the ones that we share with our team, is that different is not necessarily wrong, and that you need to keep an open mind, and particularly in a problem solving setting, but even in task execution. Just because I would do something in a certain way doesn't mean that there's not another equally valid or maybe even better way of doing something. And many leaders and managers do struggle with that. If I think back to your time in funds management, for example, you would have developed a certain expertise in your domain and in your field and your understanding of that area. And then as you become a manager and a leader, people start looking to you for guidance on how to do things. But sometimes you just got to let that go and let people discover their own path. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It is such a complex area as the human, because there's so many things that feed into it. I do remember when I was promoted to manager, on the Friday I was a peer of the supervisor, and on Monday I was his manager, and I remember him looking at me going, "What do I do?" And I'm looking at him going, "But you've years more experience than I do. You should know," or, "Why are you looking to me?" So that was a real revelation. So and in terms of with the people where you're developing them and you're guiding them towards it, it's that creativity. It's how much do you allow the creativity, and the funds industry is extremely rigid. So it's a very you do this, you do that, you do the other. There's very little space for deviation. And of course, when you move into management and you move into more senior management, you're supposed to bring new ideas and new ways of doing things, which is a really interesting thing, because you've been trained up in your early days of your career, just follow the routine, just follow the procedures. And then you're trying to come up with alternative ways, use your creativity, but it's never been really encouraged previously. So you have to make this shift into, well, how do I shift? How do I change there? From the management point of view, I think I always had I think it's, as a leader, you're marrying that piece around, here's the boundaries or the constraints of what we need to achieve. And within those boundaries and constraints, you can choose different things, different ways of doing it, but they have to be within these constraints and boundaries. And I think helping managers or leaders to understand that it's not within the boundaries and constraints and your way of doing it, that so long as you set out the boundaries and constraints and allow them the freedom to do it in whatever way while meeting those boundaries and constraints, it's an easier way to explain it, that flexibility that is required to allow people to bring their own ideas to the table.
Yeah, that's an interesting balance right there. And in the funds industry, of course, there's compliance, there's regulations, there's governance to deal with, but you still want to encourage creativity in your leaders and in your teams. So that is an interesting balance to achieve. And in any industry, there are always some level of framework that needs to be respected. In the funds industry, it's particularly important around compliance. And the idea there about keeping an open mind and letting go of what you already know and not listening for what you already know and listening for what supports what you already know, listening
Yes.
for things other than what you want to hear so that you can have that creativity. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. And that's where the complexity of the human comes in, because as a human, we have so many things going on with us. We have, we have our mindset, we have our beliefs, we have our values, we have our social expectations of the culture that we grew up in. So there are so many things, so many layers feeding into us as leaders, and it's some of it is unpeeling those and unpeeling the impact of them and understanding them, and understanding, when do I use this, when do I not, when do I need to let go. And I suppose again, I know we will come to the book in a little while, but the complexity of trying to develop somebody's problem solving, because there are so many different types of people and they can be starting in so many different places. And you're bringing your own complexity and you're bringing their complexity to it and trying to peel it all out or tease it all out, so it is, but there is that complexity, and I suppose that's what fascinates me about the human. It's the understanding, how does all this come together to how we show up.
The things that you're talking about here they're really at the heart of why we started the Leadership Project. And what we talk a lot about is that very first transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager or leader, and someone being an expert in their domain, and then discovering just how complex human beings are. And they might be the most wonderful software engineer, the most wonderful technician, the most wonderful accountant, and they're very good at what they do. And then they discover that human beings don't necessarily always respect the rules of, repeatability. Like they can be erratic from one day to the next, and what was good for them on Friday all of a sudden doesn't suit them on Monday, and for all kinds of reasons. And this is the journey that we're trying to help people navigate, that complexity of how to relate with other human beings. You've mentioned multiple times now, Irial, something also that's important to us, and that is the word values. When we talk to people about what makes a great leader, the word values does come up a lot. Can you tell us what it means to you?
This is an excellent question. And when I was writing the book, I had to kind of, I suppose, craft the meaning of it to me for the definition. And to me, values are things that are so important to us that we have an expectation and are willing to put in effort into living up to our values. But the caveat of it is we have an expectation that we and others live up to our values. And of course, if we extract that out of that's the definition, as I've experienced it, I have an expectation that I and other people live up to my expectations, but equally they have an expectation that they and other people, i.e. me, live up to their expectations. But of course, our expectations, our values aren't necessarily the same. And not only that, are they not necessarily the same, but even if we had a very similar value, a value of respect or a value of curiosity, which would be one of mine, we might not have the same definition or expectations about that value, what that value means. And so in my experience, and this is why it was such a big aha moment for me, was that when our expectations as humans aren't met, it starts creating, I suppose, emotional turmoil in us because our expectations aren't being met, even if we don't really know what our expectations are. So even though we all have values, not everybody knows clearly or explicitly what their values are. And so therefore they don't necessarily know what their expectations are. And when those expectations aren't met by themselves or other people, it causes a tension or a low-level conflict in them. And so to me, that's what values are. They're sort of expectations we have of ourselves and others that we live up to, or we and other people live up to our values.
I really like that picture that you're painting there about values and expectations, whether you know them or not. That's very interesting. And I think about different times that you either do it yourself or you see other people can be very hard on themselves, maybe kicking themselves and get disappointed or even frustrated with themselves. And it could be when they've had behaviors that don't resonate with their values and beliefs. That's interesting, whether they know them or not. The other thing that I'm hearing here is about where people need to be very clear about those. We talk about values as something that would govern your behavior and what you do when no one is looking. And when no one has told you what to do, what you would do in that situation in any case, it would be very values driven. What do you think is the connection between values and trust?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So in my experience of working with people and their values, and then as well working with leaders, trust is it's a very complex area. we all, in my experience, and this is purely coming from my experience, but people tend to fall into two categories as humans. They tend to fall into the category of people who extend trust as the first port of call. And then if the trust is broken, they will rescind the trust. The other group of people are that other people have to earn their trust. So that leads to two different approaches to life. So there's that general piece around, do I tend to extend trust, or do I tend to need people to earn my trust? So there's that layer around trust. But then there's also the layer that some people do have the value of trust. Okay, so it is an actual value of theirs, as opposed to a general, I extend trust, or I need people to we need trust in our lives, but how we get it, whether we extend it, whether people earn it, is sort of a baseline. But then for some people out of that group, they have a specific value of trust. And so behaviors that they see as untrustworthy causes that additional conflict or tension between them, because their expectation is that people are trustworthy, and that they live up to the ideal of being trustworthy. And of course, sometimes they come in contact with people that don't meet that requirement or that expectation of what that would look like. Again, going back to the definitions of all of this. So to me, trust is for some people, it is a value for them. But there's a baseline of, we all fall into one category or the other, one bucket or the other, as to how we approach trust.
Really interesting. It's starting to get a little bit meta at this point, because you're right, trust is a value in its own right. But I also feel, and this is really touching on one of your previous books at this point about values not just being for the office wall plaque, I also think it is then a driver of trust or mistrust. So by getting out there and stating very openly what your values and beliefs are, including talking about your vision and purpose as well. So getting out there, telling people what your vision is, what your purpose is, what your values and beliefs are, you are going to attract like-minded people to come and join you on that journey. People that believe in the same vision, people that have similar values and beliefs to you. But then if the behavior does not match those values and beliefs, that's what is probably the quickest way to erode that trust. Any reflections on that?
I would absolutely agree with you. And that's why the book is titled the way it's titled, because a lot of times organizations will state values, but they don't bring them into the senior people, the executives, the leaders of the company they're not necessarily reflective of their personal values. And so therefore they make decisions that are completely at odds with the values. So to me, if a company is going to set out its values stall, for want of a better phrase, they need to have done some serious work with the executive team to actually identify the values that they can all align on and connect to on a personal basis, because otherwise they will make decisions that are at odds with those values. And people read actions, they read decisions, they take messages out of those. And there is that saying, it's one of my favorite sayings, actions speak louder than words. And so you can tell me you value this left, right, and center. You can tell me that all you want, but if you make decisions, if you act in ways that don't align with that and don't align with my expectation of what that means, I won't believe you. Which brings us back to the definitions and why it's so important for companies. It's not just about identifying the value. It's around defining, what do we mean by that value? What does that value look like? What are the boundaries of that value? Another thing, and I talk about this, but I don't think anybody else talks about it when they're talking about values, but I would also say that companies need to rank their values. If we have a situation where two values are coming into conflict, which one are we going to prioritize? Which one is more important to us? And the thing is, when you're in the middle of it, it's very difficult to rank them or to have that level of awareness. So having ranked them in advance can be helpful, not absolutely necessary, but can be definitely helpful around, if we were to come up with a conflict, what way do we think we would rank these? Because the decisions you will come up with, depending on the order of your values, will be very different.
I haven't seen a lot of organizations do that. I see them put up value statements that are all relatively equal to each other, and they can be in conflict. That's very interesting. We've also had the word expectations now circle up multiple times. And one of the things that you said there resonated strongly as well is that common understanding of those expectations, because the words on the office wall plaque, everyone might be able to read those words, but do they walk away with the same expectation of what those words drive? And you end up in situations where organizations might openly state that they're a people first organization, and then the actions don't match the expectations of their staff about what it means to be a people first organization. I hear statements often on different group chats and things like this about, this company XYZ says that they're a people first company, and yet their maternity policy or their paternity policy shows that that's not the case. And that means that there was a expectation of the individual, the person that's working for that company, that being a people first organization means that you have a very strong focus on maternity and paternity. That's their interpretation of that. And if the organization's interpretation of being a people first organization is different, you've got conflict.
That's a perfect example of what I'm getting at and what I was talking about earlier. It's that we have these expectations in our head, and if our expectation isn't being met by how somebody else interprets it, that brings about that conflict. So it's a great example. And that is why it's so important to really explore, for the leaders to really explore, when we say this value, what exactly do we mean? Where are the boundaries? Where are the conflicts? Where are the, like, if it was this situation and that situation, what would we expect here? And that takes time, and it takes vulnerability from the leaders to really have those open conversations, to really admit, well, I don't actually agree with that at all. I wouldn't stand over that, and have that out, because maybe they're not a good fit anymore. Maybe this isn't the right organization, but a lot of times leaders will go, we need to do this. But the level of real engagement, as in the real aha moments of what it means and what the commitment means and what the impact of if we don't do it correctly, which is that conflict and that tension and that comments from the staff who have a different understanding. And then there's a lot of commentary, and the grapevine is, it's, not positively reflective of what they're trying to achieve with having these values in the first place. It's actually causing more problems for them on the grapevine than if they'd never stated anything. So it's that really understanding. It's not just about saying this, it's around really understanding it and committing to it.
I'm hearing three really important things there, Irial. I'm hearing about conflicts. I'm hearing about both internal and external conflict that can rise from these situations. The second thing I'm hearing is the move from unstated expectations to stated expectations. And you mentioned a lot about, even if the person's expectations are just in their head, if those expectations are not met, then there is conflict, coming back to point one. And then point three is that clarity of understanding and clarity of prioritization. That's three really powerful things right there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that summary.
Oh, very good. Okay. Now, here's an interesting one for you. We are the Leadership Project. Your book is called The Manager's Dilemma. What do you think the differences are between a leader and a manager?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I was doing research recently about the manager and the leader, and the negativity about the term manager was frightening, actually, I have to say. It seems to be that it's associated with, a dictator almost, which has not been my personal experience about being a manager, I have to say. And to me, the leadership role is to set out the vision and to see the potential and to make sense of what needs to happen. And is able to articulate that, is able to share the stories of what that would look like, and is able to guide and coach people towards achieving it. And being able to break it down, if you think about a leader is often a coach. A leader is often that person who can see that vision of what people and what teams and what organizations can become, and is able to share that with people and bring them along with them. And often there's that ability to break things down and to kind of bring them, break it down sufficiently that they can follow each stage and follow them along and kind of go, okay, I can do that. I can do that. I can follow that. You can get that. And so that they succeed. And the manager role is to make sure that things get done. So it's that the work of the business gets done. And I suppose in terms of my experiences over the years of having these conversations, it's almost like if there's no requirement for change, a manager that keeping the ship on course and keeping it all tickety-boo and working is all you need. The scheduling, the making sure the guys that are able to do their jobs, those sorts of things. You don't necessarily need much more than that. If there's a lot of change, you need people to be able to articulate what that change means and where it's going to go to. I also think the terms manager and leader are really interesting because they tend not to be where they tend to sit in the same role. So if you've got a senior manager, you have a leadership hat part of that role, and you have a management hat part of that role. And they are two distinct things, and they do require different skill sets. And I've had this conversation with numerous managers, with numerous people, as we've explored, well, is a leader always a manager? Always, if you're a good leader, are you always a good manager? No. If you're a good manager, are you always a good leader? No. Which means that they're distinct roles and they have distinct capabilities with them. So, I mean, your ideal is a person in a senior role, in that management senior leadership role, who combines both of them, because organizations need both. It's not I would say, I'd love to look at a company. I would love to be introduced to a company where they have just pure leadership roles, right? Because they don't. They kind of go, well, you are in a leadership position, but you also have a management responsibility in some shape or form, for the most part. So it gets really confused in people's heads, because oftentimes the titles are called managers, or some are moving towards leadership roles, but it's that articulation. What's the expectation of the role? And is the expectation that you're a leader? Is the expectation that you're a manager? Is the expectation that you can do both and that you're able to flex between them and know when to use which?
Yeah, very good, Irial. And that is the balance. And you might even need balance across different people in your business, because not everyone is going to get the balance right themselves. So you may need those inspirational people that are looking at the vision of the business, that are able to inspire people into action because they wanted to do it, not because they were told to do it. So inspiring people into action around a common vision and purpose, and coaching people and drawing the best out of people. These are all very admirable qualities of a leader. A manager can be very task oriented, and okay, this task is due on Friday. Are we going to meet the deadline? Are we tracking to our budgets? Are we, all of these things are very much in the management domain, and you do need both. As much as we espouse leadership values here in this project, and we speak a lot about inspiring people to be better leaders, there's no doubt that without some management mindset, things won't actually get done on time and on budget, etc. So it's about balancing those things. Very good. Okay, I want to now really draw us towards the new book, The Manager's Dilemma. And you mentioned something very early in the interview that was really interesting. You spoke about someone that was previously your peer, very senior in the organization, and experienced, I should say, very experienced in the organization. And then one day you're their peer, next day you're their supervisor, and they come to you and say, okay, boss, what do we do now? What
Yeah.
changed in that 24 hours that they knew how to do their job the day before? Now today, all of a sudden, they don't know how to do their job. Talk us through that.
Yeah, and it, I do remember it was Monday morning. What? It always stuck in my mind. And interestingly, I don't know that I understood it fully then, but now what I would say looking back is it was in America. And in the American culture, it is quite hierarchical. It's like people look to their boss, to their boss, to their boss. One might not necessarily think that automatically, but there is a hierarchy of, there's a, I suppose there's a level of casualness, but there's also a level of respect for your boss. And so I think it was actually a reflection of that sort of, well, you're my boss now, so what do you want me to do? So, I wouldn't say he still knew how to do the day-to-day of his job, but he was certainly giving me the respect of I was now his boss and I should direct him, or I should kind of give him feedback, give him input into what he was doing. But I suppose typically I just, I go, well, okay, fine, I'll tell him something. So I kind of just go with it. But it really stuck out, that kind of, why would it have changed so much? Like, what would I have known, or what would I have learned over the weekend that would make me that much more important or more senior to him, when in actual fact he had had several years more experience than me. But so in making sense of it now, I think it was more to do with the culture, of that respect for your boss.
Yeah, I didn't think of that when you were talking about it, but that is an element of it. The respect and I've got to say that I get. Where I was going with the question was about, certainly he knew how to do his job on Friday. Certainly he knew how to do his job on Monday. What prompted him all of a sudden to need to check in with someone? But yeah, I do like what you're saying about respect, and let's keep that in mind as we progress. Then in the intro to The Manager's Dilemma, you talk about someone coming and knocking on your door and asking you a question they clearly knew the answer to, and yet they were still asking you that question. What did you discover through that?
I discovered through that the content of the book. Yeah, this was I again, one of those ones that really stand out in my mind. I was looking at her going, I know you know the answer to this. So what could possibly be going on for you that you think you need to ask that question? And that really was the trigger for me around this whole topic of the book. And I think I just answered the question at the time. I mean, I think I was just so shocked. I just answered the question, but it really got me thinking. And I was really going, what could be going on for her that she would think she needed to come to me with that? And I came to the conclusion, I don't think I specifically say this in the intro, but I came to the conclusion that there was obviously a confidence thing there, that she wasn't 100% confident that she was making the right call. And so what I did was I kind of said, okay, well, if that's the case, what do I need to do differently here? How do I need to approach this the next time she comes to me? And what I concluded was that I needed to ask her questions and get her talking and get her telling me what she thought she needed to do. And so that's what I did the next time she came to me. I said, well, what do you think? What are your thoughts on it? And she went through her thoughts and went through her. And I was listening, and I said, well, have you thought about this, or what about that? You know, again, more probing questions. I wasn't giving her the answer. I was asking probing questions to get her to make sure she was thinking of all the things I would think of. And so we did that for a few weeks. And then I said, you know, next time what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to come to me with what you think the right thing to do is, and why you think it is. So the next time she did that, so she's like, yeah, okay, fine. And she gave me her reasonings and what she was, the options and what she was recommending. And we did that. I was like, again, if there was gaps, if there was things that I thought she hadn't included, I'd ask questions. And then a couple of weeks later, she basically came to me and said, this is the issue, this is the problem, this is what I'm saying, these are the options, this is what I'm recommending for these reasons. And I was kind of like, you've got it. You know how to do this. You don't need me anymore. You're off. So her confidence had been built up, that she knew, okay, I know exactly what Irial is thinking. I know exactly the questions Irial is going to ask. I know exactly what her perspectives are going to be on this. And that knowledge, that understanding, that confidence had built up, or whatever, that she was able to kind of go, yeah, I know what to do here. And that really freed her up. And obviously it also freed me up, because I wasn't having to, you know, you might be in the middle of something, or because we were delivering training, you might be gone for 3 hours before she could run something past you. So things would have been delayed if she wasn't comfortable and confident in answering those questions. So that was and as I said in the book, I thought it was just me. I just thought, oh, like, that's just, sure, every manager knows how to do that. And then what I realized was, over the years, I was coaching and talking with managers and training and that, and I realized, actually, they don't know how to do this. They don't know how to break it down. They don't know how to coach somebody from the potential starting point. I was lucky she was very close to the end of the process. It was only the confidence that we needed to build up.
Yeah, very good. So for the audience at home, to give the synopsis of the book in just a few words. So what we're talking about here is this dilemma around problem solving. And the essence of the book is how to empower your teams to become problem solvers in their own right. And the experiment, or not the experiment, the example that Irial is talking about is a very common one, where people come to managers with problems, expecting managers to solve them for them, and it becomes an issue. And you used the word before about freeing up. So I want to explore that a little bit further. What did you mean by, well, once you broke that through with this person and they were more in the mindset of solving their own problems, what did you mean in terms of freeing her up and freeing you up? Let's explore that more.
Yeah, so for her, I think it freed up the, you know, if you look at it from her perspective, when you constantly have to go to somebody and you're reliant on them almost to kind of, whether it's to give you permission, it can almost feel, for some people, it can feel like being given permission, or some people it can feel like it's they need that support, or, you know, whatever it is. But there's a reliance on the other person, because you can't move forward until you've talked to them. You can't move forward until you've, you know, explained it to them, and that's quite restrictive for them. So it holds them back. So the fact that they're confident, that they know, okay, you're going to have their back, and I suppose this is some of it as well. They know that they have thought things through. They have a pretty good idea. Chances are, whatever decision they make, however they decide to sort out the problem, chances are it's going to be 95% in the ballpark. And that's a huge level of comfort, which means that it reduces the worry there might be, or the fear that there might be. But also knowing that kind of going, well, I know my boss will turn around. If this is wrong, I know my boss will support me 100%, because I'll have thought it through and approached it in the exact same way they would. So they'll stand over me. So that, again, is a hugely freeing thing from their perspective, because they know that their boss has their back. So that, all of that worry, all that concern, all that, what if I'm wrong, all that, the gremlins in the voice, or in the back of the head, sorry, the gremlins can be kind of like, no, it's okay, because I know I'm approaching it in the right way, and I know it'll be supported, and I know it'll be 90, if not 100%, I know it'll be 95%, and that's the vast majority of situations more than enough. And for the manager themselves, like the concept of flow, that, you know, when we're in flow and we are concentrating on a piece of work and we get disrupted, they say, I think Microsoft did some research where they said it showed that it takes about 15 minutes to get yourself back into flow, plus the loss of the time that you was dealing with this situation, whatever, you know, whatever the thing was. So you're not getting interrupted to the same degree, because the guys know more or less what to do, whatever. So they're only really coming to you with the really serious things. They're the ones that are really stuck, but they're coming to you because they need your input. They need you as a sounding board, and that's appropriate that they're coming to you, or they're coming to you because, you know, it's a true escalation that you do need to step in and take over at that point. But if they're coming to you sort of for your input, it's because they really do need a sounding board. They might have 2 or 3 different options, and they're going to need to weigh these ones up with you, and it could well be appropriate that they do come to you at that point. But for the most part, you're not getting these regular interruptions. So you can focus in on your own work and kind of get the work done faster than if you have to deal with somebody, 2, 3, 4 team members coming to you. You can just run this past one. What do you think I should do here? You know, so it frees you up as well. And you also have that confidence that, you know, they're going to be more or less in the ballpark, whatever they decide to do.
There's so many powerful things there, Irial. I almost don't know where to start to unpack that one, because there's little threads of gold in everything you just said. And I do want to unpack it a little bit more. We'll come back to the escalation later. And I think that's an important lesson coming out of your book as well.